Good afternoon. I have great pleasure in introducing Dr. R Balasubramaniam. He's a very well-known and very well-respected development activist, particularly, I must say, in the South. He started off in the development sector by working with tribal communities in remote locations of Mysuru district. He has spent 36 years in the service of the rural and tribal poor. After getting his MBBS degree as a doctor, he earned an MPhil in hospital management and health systems from BITS Pilani. So he combines actually both these worlds of medicine as well as development. So I find that quite interesting because I also have a background of both law and development. The Harvard Kennedy School awarded him a master's in public administration. He's a Tata Scholar, a Mason Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School, and a Fellow at the Hauser Center for Civil Society at Harvard University.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me at the Jindal Global University at the commencement speech for the School of Government and Public Policy. So I thank Professor Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, Sudarshan, good friend, Professor Sridhar, Kaveri, and everybody else who's there. I would also like to extend a welcome to the students. You know, when you join a course, you always have this doubt: do they do the right thing? Do they take something which is out of this world? Because policy is not something which is like engineering or medicine, where people simply choose and say, okay, no, I can get a job. Well, let me tell you, 15 years ago, I wanted to set a school of public policy. Everybody called me a fool. They said India is unprepared for this. And if somebody wanted to study policy in our country, they had to either look for Kennedy or Syracuse or Berkeley or Lee Kuan Yew School closer by. So they never thought that India could have a school of public policy. And the second part, and I fully echo and resonate with what Sudarshan was saying, not just for civil services, even those a generation of people trained in public policy from this country are people who have been trained outside this country. And therefore, their understanding of policy, maybe the fundamental principles may not change much. The contextual relevance of what they might have studied, the cultural appropriateness of what they might have imbibed, may not be something which would actually make them a good policy maker in India. It may make them good for a job in the World Bank in DC, or maybe to work as an intern in the White House. But coming down to our country, sitting down on the ground with our people and understanding what they come from and where they come from and listening to their voices and then making it into a policy is something India lacked badly. So when I visited Jindal several years ago when Sudarshan just started it, I was deeply inspired and I was extremely happy that somebody took a risk. And I asked him one question, I don't know if he still remembers. I said, how could this university be stupid enough to start something which is never going to be commercially viable in India? And at that time, I don't know if Sudarshan remembers the answer. He says, you got to ask Professor Rajkumar this. I don't know. And I can tell you now, looking back, must have been such an eventful decade for all of you. And I congratulate all of you for this bold initiative nearly a decade ago. And I'm sure it will pay off for the country. I don't really, I know that university will somehow find a way to sustain. But I think what you're doing is going to help policy in a very evidential framework to sustain in this country. So I must congratulate the Vice Chancellor of the University, Sudarshan, and all the faculty for doing something which is extremely important. So I want to congratulate the students for actually being part of this journey. It's like I said, it's a very difficult decision to take when it's easy to go the conformist way, difficult to go the non-conformist way, and also more difficult if you know those few who know public policy and the background of it would always think that it can't be taught in India. So to come to one of the best universities in India, which took this bold step some time ago and then pursuing it, I think, I don't think the university, like the way Sudarshan explained, has already thought so much about it. I'm sure it will be a rewarding experience. And we at the Commission are also looking forward to working with some of the students, and we'll explore how best we can partner and make sure that this becomes a practice-driven program, not just a theory-driven program. So thank you once again for having me. Kaveri had a question. to share my experience or sort of a suggestion. I have to say, how did I come into public policy? Now, how does a practitioner like me, who's more comfortable sitting in a tribal hut, eating a ragi mudde with the tribal women and then worrying about tomorrow, ever worry about public policy? So distant. And I was, in Kannada, we have a statement. The word for a village is halli. So we would say, if people look at me, they'll say, halli in the Delhi. So I come from a village to Delhi now. And why? Why you come to Delhi? Why bother even? So I must tell you something which happened several years ago, close to 25, maybe, no, yeah, 25, more than 25 years ago, late 90s, 95, 96. An extraordinary public administrator who's written books on public administration, is retired and long retired, was also part of our Administrative Reforms Commission, etc. S.K. Das, I know, maybe Sudarshan would know him from Karnataka. The day he took over as the Welfare Secretary of Karnataka, Social Welfare Secretary, he just didn't tell anybody. He just came and stayed with us for 15 days at SVYM. And he just told me, only you know I'm the Secretary of the department. I'm sure my own Taluk social welfare officers don't even know who the hell I am. You don't have to introduce me, don't have to tell me who I am, don't have to tell tribals who I am. Just let me live with you for 15 days. Just walk, do whatever you do, shadow you. And that was a fascinating learning journey for an extraordinarily sensitive administrator. He understood what tribal development was from the eyes of a tribal. Sometimes I'm sitting in an institution which actually trains these public administrators. They're trained to believe they have the answers to all the world's problems. So the design itself is such a way that we train them to believe they have the authority to solve all problems, they have the knowledge to solve all problems, and therefore they are the saviors of the world. And here was an administrator who said, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to know what to do. And I think the best people who can teach me is the tribals and you. And I want to just spend 2 weeks here. That was a great eye-opener for me, that some public administrator actually has the courage to say, I don't know. And more importantly, has the humility to say, I want to learn from communities. And the next 2 weeks was a great opportunity for us to discover that there's so much that the state could learn from these indigenous communities. And much of it is what is in my first book, I, the Citizen. And thus then went back and together we designed a program completely driven by tribal cultural context, which later got completely hijacked by the state as one of its own programs. And it got messed up because other administrators did not have the sensitivity thus carried. I bring this lesson to you because when we designed the program, one of the things we learned was tribals don't have a sense of individual ownership. They always lived as a commune, as a collective. So the chieftain would say, my collective's land comes from that valley to this mountain, and they would cultivate that part in between. And so there's an equitable distribution of the harvest. And everything was done in a way in which it was collectivized, but the chieftain was supreme. And the government comes in with no understanding of neither the anthropological nor the cultural background of tribals, makes a policy which says the forest is something which is foreign to you. The forests don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the forest. And we come and tell them that the forests don't belong to you, making laws which they don't understand. And then also tell them that this is your land. This is your 2 acres. This is your house. So community of 10,000 year anthropological history suddenly discovers that communal living is a sin. Individual existence is what has to be celebrated. So our policies, without even understanding the background of its own citizens, designed a living experience where you started saying, this is my land and my 2 acres and my house. And we then came in and said, no, we're going to change this to the extent we can. We can't change the laws of the land, but at least could we change the programs which will recreate the cultural ambience of the tribals. And so we said, if 10, 15 tribals come together, 25 to 30 acres of land under one chieftain, we'll take that as one community irrigation project and see if people can be lifted out of poverty through agriculture. Great design. We did some wonderful work. Extreme, and we actually had one tractor for 13 tribal colonies. We said every tribal colony only needs a bullock cart. So we embedded human development on traditional practices, but with the understanding of anthropology and culture. I'm saying all this because this also happened to be a lesson for me that when tribals started cultivating land, In one particular area, when they went to cultivate land, the forest department came in and said, this is our land, you can't cultivate here. How can you come into forest? And the tribals had documents. Tribals had actually paid what we call those days malki. The forest government when it allots land, especially forest land, they would cut the trees and take it. Or if they left behind the trees, the subsequent owner to whom the government allotted land had to pay a price, a malki, that is what it is called. These are all words which Karnataka government inherited from Tipu Sultan's times. So we use the same words even now. I don't know why, but at least they're not colonial, so it's different. And these people had paid taxes, they had legitimate ownership, and they were given legitimate compensation when their land was either submerged by the building of the Kabini Dam, again another policy decision, a dam which never benefited the tribals, or the national park being formed. And at that time, when they went to cultivate, here was one department of government gives the land, another department of government comes and says, no, this is our land. And the tribals were beaten up, arrested, all sorts of things happened. To cut a long story short, we sued the government. And for that, you need to understand how the state works. And I learned it all on my own. But to understand, there's a constitutional body called the Human Rights Commission. Nobody trains you in all this. Nobody trained me in medicine and all this. That you pick it up on the job. And then we won the case. And all that the history taught me that laws were made in this country, not keeping citizens in mind, but keeping the state and its enormous power in mind. And sometimes you may have to make such decisions. I'm not saying all those decisions are wrong. State has to think on behalf of the citizens. But then sometimes you have to say that I take this decision because it might in the long term benefit my citizens. But that started me thinking, if laws can be made, who are the ones making them? Why are they making these kind of laws? Do citizens have a voice in the way these laws get framed? These people have the human sensitivities, the compassion that you need when you frame such a law which affects thousands of people. So I thought I should get to understand this. And that's how my journey of understanding public policy began. And I discovered soon that public policy in our country was hardly being made by trained, qualified policy makers. They were all made by people in authority, not by people understanding public policy. So the words evidence-based, like evidence-based medicine, evidence-based public policy is more a fashion statement, more a slogan. And people really didn't go back and check what impact does my policy have? Does it really attain the desired impact? So when I started struggling with these questions, and then in the struggle for these answers to these questions, I went to the Kennedy School and all that. But what I learned, and this is where it's so important, that it's so encouraging. To me, it doesn't really matter whether you call your degree BA Economics or BA Honors. What matters is you're embedded in a policy school. And that is what is such a safety factor as far as I'm concerned. Because I'm not a fan of economics, though I've studied development economics. I say this because what a policy school can do to an economic student is make you compassionate. It gives you a humanized understanding of economics. Whereas what a pure economic school may do is may not give you this. And therefore, I believe that if you have to study economics, study it in a policy school. At least you will be able to put your heart and connect your heart to the economics that you study. It will not be the dry economics that people understand economics as. And therefore, I think you made a wise choice. So what I'm not trying to market Jindal. I'm only trying to say how lucky you are to be in a school which is thought of all this. But the point I'm trying to make is I realized people have all kinds of definitions of public policy. And the simplest definition that I learned from being on the field was my way of looking at what public policy was not in our country. But what I discovered, but what public policy in reality actually is from a citizen's perspective is, policy in a very simple way is merely the intent and actions of a public agency, and in this case, a government. So what does the government intend to do? What is the government intended to protect the forest? That's what the government is claiming. But how did it act? In the intent of protecting the forest, it alienated the indigenous tribal communities. So if your intent had just been expanded by a sensitive, compassionate human being to say, my intent is to protect the forest through the agency of the indigenous tribals, we wouldn't have had a problem at all. So this looked like so simple to me. And I had to sue the government to get them to see this point of view. Went to the Human Rights Commission. Thankfully, we had an extraordinary Justice M. N. Venkatacharya and then Justice Verma, two extraordinary legal luminaries who understood what I was trying to communicate, and we won the battle. But that's just one battle, like Sudarshan said, maybe 500 families in my area benefit. That's it. They don't become a state law. That's when I realized if this has to become the national law, the country, the only agency that can do it is the national government or the state government implementer. So public policy at that point of time, I'm talking of 25 years ago, suffered from the deficit of talent, suffered from the deficit of compassionate understanding of citizens' needs, suffered from the humility of listening to citizens and people, suffered from the collaborative spirit of talking to think tanks and schools. And then we also suffered from not having public policy schools, whom we could turn to and say, help us think through this. I think 25 years has been a long time. Things have changed in government. Today, the government has a prime minister who believes that capacity building cannot be just an internal matter. He brings in a man completely outside the system like me, a civil society activist. He brings in a private sector player like Adil, the commission's chairman, and also an insider, and puts all the three together and says, the collective aggregate talent pool that this team can bring is what the government needs. And if that is the way government is changing, imagine what your vice chancellor just mentioned now. Studying in a public policy school where you will have the opportunity to get 500 courses, which is already integrated knowledge from the private sector, the public sector, and the civil society group. You have a development school, you have a policy school, you have a public health school, you have a business school, and you have science and arts. So you couldn't have asked for something better to get ready for the demands of the next generation of public policy makers in this country. So you have to exploit the 2 years you're there. If I were you, I wish I could come back to school, but unfortunately, no, Sudarshan will not take me as a student. He will say I'm too old for it now. But I think such a privilege that you can be in an intellectually stimulating ecosystem, in a space where you can actually build the skill sets you need to come out into the system and understand policy. But then coming back to my real topic, why did I lay all this background and foundation is to understand the importance of policy, the importance of getting yourself formally qualified. I was a practitioner, so I had to understand policy to get to know where I am. It took me 20 years, but you could get it in 2 years. And that is what is the benefit of going to a structured university, which capsulates knowledge around the world, which gets people from around the world and gets them to transact it in 2 years' time for all of your benefit. You don't have to spend 20, 30 years like me, understanding and deconstructing the world of policy. You can get it in 2 years flat. And that is how formal degrees do matter. Whether you like it or not, I like it or not, COVID or no COVID, brick and mortar institutions will evolve, but will never disappear. They may find newer ways, and that's what I keep saying, the future-ready universities cannot be bereft of brick and mortar, but you'll find newer ways of transacting, you'll find newer ways of sharing knowledge, newer ways of applying knowledge. And professional schools like Jindal is not going to be happy just teaching public policy in a classroom. I'm sure the partnership that you have built will be driven by practice. And why does COVID make such a distinct difference? And why is COVID so important for us? COVID has been a challenge which has touched, like Sudarshan said, government touches everybody's life. COVID is possibly the only incident in our lifetime that, as we all know, has touched possibly every individual in this world today. At the individual level, it has touched our lives. It touches our lives at an institutional level. Jindal as a university gets affected. States get affected. Countries get affected. The globe has got affected. And one thing that is common amongst all this is the fact that we don't know too much about how to manage all this. The systems are not ready to take on a crisis, and how do we deal with this? So we are all responding with the inadequate knowledge that we have, with the inconsistent, inadequate data that we're getting, and also with incomplete knowledge of the sciences that goes into the understanding and reconstructing and decoding of the virus. The science might have built the virus, we don't know. But science has to discover how to stop the virus also. So we are in a world where one single event, if you can say, which actually calls upon the space of public policy and public administration from around the world, it has been COVID. Till now, we never had anything like that which touched across the world. So responses that we can all create, understand, and build are going to be responses that are going to be lessons for the rest of the world. And we are seeing countries, and this is a fascinating opportunity. We've got in front of our eyes in the last 12 months, different policy responses of different countries. Look at Brazil, look at the United States, look at the European Union, look at within the European Union, how Germany responds, how France responds, look at how India responded, look at how New Zealand responds, how Australia responds. Each country's response has been different. Each country's understanding of the problem has been different. Each country's reading of the situation has been different, but their data is all reasonably similar. So the contexts are different, the leaderships are different. So I believe the COVID experience is an extraordinary lesson for all of us. Well, I as a doctor, I understand the problems, the public health challenges. All of us have been touched by it. We might have lost family members, we might have lost close friends. In our own organization, we lost 8 employees to COVID. So it's a big challenge. All of us have been touched in different ways. We don't even know how to grieve anymore because they become numbers now. Every morning, you look at the newspaper and say 3,000 dead here, 4,000 dead there. You know, earlier at least one earthquake, 5,000 people die. You feel, oh my God, 5,000 people die. But today, every morning, we are all becoming insulated on how to respond to this also. So things are changing so fast for all of us. But COVID has taught us several things. And I want to begin from that. And then only then can I explain what is the post-COVID world would look like and what kind of policymakers will fit into that world. And hopefully, Sudarshan and faculty teams will actually prepare all of you for this kind of a post-COVID. For the first time in history, COVID has demonstrated how fragile we are as a human race. Despite issues of climate justice, despite issues of all the challenges we face, a nuclear war, Second World War, the fragility was never more glaringly demonstrated than it is now. Today, we understand that we really are caught in a world which we are struggling to make meaning of. We really don't have the armamentarium of responses which we had earlier. We knew that you could have a nuclear treaty to possibly prevent a nuclear war. You really don't have an idea how to even fight the COVID situation. We're all learning every day as we go. We're making mistakes. We're learning from other people's mistakes. One country has a lockdown, other country doesn't want to have a lockdown. One country says they'll have herd immunity and then suffers because of it, and we learn from it. So we're all learning. And policy has never been by just this kind of an experiential process. It was never real time in that sense. The time delay in public policy was we always based our policy making on historical data. We always looked at the past and said, okay, the last 10 years, this is how trends are indicating. So this, if you do this policy, this is how it look in the future. And then my generation of policy learning, when I did, we understood predictive analysis. And we said, okay, how do we, based on the data of the past, how do you predict the policy's impact on the future? But that all presumed the future would behave exactly in the way the past behaved. But suddenly COVID comes and my predictive analysis has gone. God, I don't know where, you can't even use those words. You know, I still remember 4 or 5 years ago, as part of the Kennedy School Alumni Board, we were helping the dean restructure the entire public policy curriculum. And we said, what is relevant, what is contextual, what has to be for today's policymakers. And during the process, we were trying to see who is the best person around the world who could teach students how to deal with situations like Cambridge Analytica. Like, those are real today. Those are not things which are fanciful statements. 15 years ago, me and Sudarshan over a cup of tea would have thought that's all a joke. Nobody could think like that. Today, we can not just predict behavior. We can actually influence and create human behaviors in particular ways. We can actually, 95% of the Facebook likes, last 20 likes on Facebook, and all of you are a Facebook generation. If I were to just take the data of your Facebook entries, wherever you say, I like, I can, with 95% accuracy, fairly predict how you will behave, and I can make you behave in that way. And now we have to say, no longer I will be teaching nudge economics. We'll have to teach how to design an algorithm which can nudge you to pay your taxes or to wear your helmet. And these are all not fancy rocket science stories. These are all realities that are going to come out of the classroom in the policy school. And are our students ready for it? Because these are the demands that society is going to make of it. So COVID has taught us not just fragility, it also taught us that we don't know how to deal with uncertainty. Human existence has always been uncertain, but we always had this pretense that we are in control. We always believe that we know the answers and we can find solutions to problems that are getting crafted around us. And we were all trained to believe that we are competent. COVID showed us that it is not competence that we need to teach in university classrooms, which will anyway acquire through Google knowledge. You don't even need a university classroom. What universities have to teach our policymakers is how do you operate from zones of incompetence? How do you come to terms with your own incompetence and therefore build the humility to learn to acquire more competence and then deal with the situation? Because if you don't learn how to learn, you'll never know how to deal with uncertainty. Because learning and stagnating with that learning that you get in universities can help you understand certainty in a particular perspective. But if you want to deal with uncertainty, we shouldn't be teaching you anything. We should be helping you learn. And that's all we need to do. So universities, especially public policy schools, in my view, can no longer be teaching centers of policy. They can at best be facilitators or institutions which create learning ecosystems for trying out policy. So I'm sure Jindal might have this, but you may have to look at policy labs as part of the construct of policy teaching, and where students actually are out in the field, actually working with policymakers and policy administrators and implementers and evaluators, going through the actual nuances of all this. COVID is demanding that. If you don't do that, I don't think you're going to get ready. So the vulnerability of mankind, the fragility of mankind, the uncertainty of human existence, and more importantly, it has redefined public sector itself. Now, when you talk of public policy, it was very easy for my generation to understand public policy because we knew exactly what is public sector. I was trained to believe there are only three sectors. One, we said public sector, or what we call the first sector, and they are the ones who deliver on public goods and public welfare. And then we said, no, the private sector comes in. And then in India, 91 onwards, they really made an impact. And we said that's the second sector, which bottom lines are profit making. And soon enough, not to be left behind, we said, no, we are the third sector. We are the civil society groups. Both these sectors are not complete. And so we bring in that complementarity to the sectors. But today, let me tell you, COVID has taught us that sectoral boundaries are getting blurred. No longer can we say, I have been trained in MBA programs, I'll only work in the business part of the world. You cannot no longer say that I'm an MP or MPP, I work only in public spaces. I think today we need to build our students with the skill sets to transcend boundaries, to go beyond these boundaries, to be comfortable operating across these blurred margins, because the definition of public goods itself has changed. And I was talking to a few friends in the system. On one side, 3 years ago, our government decided that it's going to create systems where we'll have less government but more governance. But if you look at the last 1 year, around the world, only countries which had more government actually could manage the crisis better. Today, we have surrendered every public responsibility to the state. Society has now understood that you need the government. We can criticize it, we can use it as a punching bag, but end of the day, a responsive mechanism embedded in the state is the best deal that we can get for citizens. I think we can fight it till the cows come home. But the point is, instead of talking about is the state fulfilling its obligation, I think the time has come for us to talk about how do you build the people to populate the state with this understanding of fulfilling the obligation. And that is where policy schools make such a significant difference, in my opinion. So the way I see it is, we have to look at the fact that understanding of public goods has changed, right? In our country, if you look at it, the very understanding of state-center relations have changed. The constitutional mandate of states delivering on healthcare, if that had actually happened, the public health disaster of COVID would have been 10 times worse than what it is today. If the national government had not stepped in with guidelines, with policies, many of us might have criticized it. We could have said we could have done it better. But just imagine if the government of India had not issued those guidelines, the government of India had not stepped in, had not bought the vaccines and given to state government, if we had not given the ventilators, etc., states may not have been able to manage this crisis. So we are again redefining how relationships between central and state would look like. The federal mechanisms are changing. Understanding of public goods are changing. Private sector actually took on public responsibilities. And we must be happy that several companies in our country looked beyond their profit bottom lines and actually participated in fighting the crisis of COVID. They had no idea of how to handle the public health angle, but they were well intended. And so they need public policy makers. So I don't see policy making students getting only into government, because today every major corporate entity has got a policy analyst sitting embedded in their institutions. So it's not as though no longer can one sector claim domain opportunities for just policy students. Every sector needs this kind of space. So the boundary lines have merged, situations have changed, the skill sets that we are demanded of these people have also altered. So today, beyond the domain knowledge of public policy making, beyond that anyway schools will teach you, beyond the knowledge of how do you formulate, how do you implement, how do you analyze, how do you go back and reformulate, These are things anyway, every policy cycle is all about, and you will all get experts teaching you that. But what I believe that you will have to learn either in the university or outside the university. And this is how large, I call it an ocean-like universities like Jindal provide a fascinating opportunity. There's a seamless movement of students across schools. You get an opportunity to build a skill set, which is so critical for you to perform. But for that, you need to build a mindset. And this is something which I would like to ask all of you to start considering. The post-COVID world is not going to be driven by just professional domain competence. It's going to be driven something very fundamental. Our universities all our universities are so obsessed with providing the best of technical knowledge, the best of technical expertise. I was looking at it last year. We had one president of a country so disdainful of technical expertise, saying that COVID is not even science. And so that, and on the other side, complete dependence on our so-called specialists. We have this fascinating, if you watch Indian television every evening, from the cardiothoracic surgeon to the economist, everybody became an expert on COVID overnight. So we had all kinds of expertise. So they moved from channel to channel. Half an hour, they're expert on anthropology. Next half an hour, they're expert on gender issues. Third half an hour, they're on climate justice, and then they're talking on COVID. So it is that kind of a half-baked knowledge that could be a problem in the policy space. And that is why we need students, the formal training, but then you need something else. And that's something that, in my opinion, is a mindset. The first mindset I would like you to cultivate as you go into study and then you'll graduate and you'll soon be finding jobs. It's get the mindset of humility when you're studying. Because sometimes when you get to this top class universities like Jindal, we'll start believing they've given us all the answers to all the problems you can think of. When you get your A grades and A pluses, you'll start believing you're damn good at what you do. Don't fool yourselves. You're not actually good at anything. You're only good at possibly convincing your professor you're good at something. And I think the world is much beyond all this. What you need to have is a humility to understand that you may not know everything. Now, I keep telling this, at best what universities can do is not provide you a platform to have all the answers to the problems that your domain space is creating, but help you frame the questions better and give you the tools to discover the answers yourself. And that's the kind of humility you have to generate. The second you have to really think through and build is, how do I understand that I is not important? The work at the center is more important. It is not about I doing something. 30 years ago, I would have said, I built a hospital. I wish somebody had trained me to ask the question. Instead of saying, I am going to build a hospital, I would have framed the question as, what needs to be done to ensure tribals get healthcare? The second question is what COVID has taught us. Before, the person-centric approach was important. So policy making is about I being the policy maker. Now, issue centricity is becoming important, and that's what COVID has taught us. So what you need to learn is not about I making a difference, but asking yourself, how do I be part of a difference that is getting made? And that's a huge difference, and that's something you need to learn. Otherwise, what happens is at 23, 24, when you think the world is at my feet, it's very easy to get carried away by our own professional competences and forgetting that that will be the downfall of not just yourself, but possibly of several million people for whom you are creating the policies. So we have to be extremely careful. There's too much at stake for a policymaker not to be humble, to subsume your egos, subsume the tendency to say, I am part of a journey. Just believe that you're just part of a larger, fascinating team. So today we have to redefine communication. Communication is no longer the way we understood it before. Communication is going to be about how do you communicate loss to your constituents. Now I was remembering, how do you go tell a family of migrants who neither have a job in Bangalore? Now, we worked with a lot of migrant families in Bangalore and Mysore last year during the COVID crisis. How do you explain to him lockdown when health and disease are irrelevant to him? He's never really worried about living or dying because he just is worried about the wages he gets by actually working on that day. How do you go tell that family? You'll get 1,000 rupees from government. How do you communicate to a family who's so emotionally insecure that giving a 500 rupees will make him secure again? Which he doesn't see security in the 500 rupees at all. He sees insecurity in the fact he has to walk 1,000 kilometers back home. He's so afraid to live back in Bangalore because that's the kind of ecosystem we created for our own citizens. How do you as a policy maker not just design a scheme to give him the 500 rupees per month, but design it such compassionate outlook that you make him feel a very responsible part of society, make him feel an integral part of this Indian state, where his work is as much valued as anybody else. COVID taught us value for work. I will tell you how. I have had any number of people complain that they understood how difficult it is not to have the domestic maid come home, how difficult it was when the newspaper boy didn't deliver newspapers, how challenging it was when the milkman was not there to come and give you the milk in your doorstep. So we suddenly saw value in the janitor in the office, to the milkman, to the domestic maid. Our society, my friends, is moving away to the creation of a new sector. Several of us around the world are talking about it, and we're already shaping the policies for it. Emergence of a fourth sector economy, a sector which will take the best of DNA from the public sector. It will take the social outlook of the civil society sector and the corporate efficiency of the private sector. Combine these DNAs to create a compassionate capitalistic world, a world which is coming to terms with the fact that the current economic models of development possibly are the problem and not the solution. So we are all at the cusp of discovering, thanks to COVID, that a model of development and economic growth itself has to be redesigned. And we need the people to think through this. We need the policymakers to create the policies for this. We need people to understand how do you move from a shareholder existence to stakeholder existence? How do you move from a society which looks at equity as a benefit that you need to give to a person for the value he brings to the conversation, or the value he brings to the table? We need to train our policymakers. How do you be compassionate enough, not just to see the people who are in front of you, but to see people who are not in front of you also? To listen to the voices that you never hear otherwise. How do you understand all this in the policy space? So COVID is the wake-up call for us to create this new breed of policymakers who are not just compassionate. The three essential skills I feel are so critical. They have to have, and compassion every way around. The courage to be different, the courage to disrupt the policy space today, move it away from the traditional conformity of rule-based systems to understanding a role-based existence in public policy. What kind of a role can I play in today's modern world? And am I getting ready for that role? And that's the kind of training we need to invite. So today, a policy course without understanding of leadership, a policy course without the opportunity to study humanities subjects, because humanities have become an unwanted second cousin today. So we have to see that as an integral part of humanizing ourselves and seeing how do I integrate all this and then go out into the world. And I can tell you, we'll be better prepared. We'll never have the perfect solution. We'll never have the perfect school bringing out the perfect students. That is an impossibility. Nobody can even generate. But all I can tell you is if we take to the study of public policy this way, if we take the lessons out of the COVID experience, if we decide that we are not going to keep looking back and saying what went wrong, but see it as an opportunity to say what can go right. And if we can build a new syllabus, a new curriculum, which can either be transacted in many different ways, using technology, using brick and mortar systems, using experiential lived experiences. And if you can transact this in reflective, immersive environments, I'm confident we'll have a generation of young people like you, a cohort of people who actually make not just our country better, but will truly end up making the world a better place. I think finally what COVID has taught us is globalization, whatever ways we define it. Till COVID happened, I used to speak a lot about interconnectedness. COVID has taught us interconnectedness is no longer useful. We are truly interdependent. Whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, the mandate of the world today is global citizenship. The mandate of the world today is we can restrict ourselves to the Indian passport and American passport, etc. We can say you can't enter my country, I can't enter your country. But we can't tell the virus that, can we? So we have to find solutions together. A new understanding of collaboration, a new understanding of international spaces, a new understanding of geopolitics is emerging. But do we have a new generation of policymakers with this new understanding? And that's a question I'm sure universities and institutions like Jindal will solve. And I'm sure that 2 years later, all of you will make us all proud and you'll all go out there and leave your imprint, not on a personal level, but at a collected aggregate level as fashioners of a new policy space, a new policy ecosystem, which actually is sensitive, citizen-centric, and understands that finally it's not just we as human beings. Policy space is not just for people. I think the policy space is for planet and every inhabitant in this planet. If we have to make this world a better place, the unseen, unheard bacteria, viruses, birds, animals, trees, flora, fauna, all have to be part of your policy narratives, your policy discussions. And it's only such people who can truly make a difference. So I'll stop here. I know I've taken more time than what Kaveri gave me, but I would like to, in the next 5-10 minutes, if there are any questions which I could address. But it's careers in policy. Earlier, I used to have a session called careers in public policy. Now my answer is very simple. You name a career, I'll find you a reason for a public policy guy to be there. So that is the demand for policy. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Balu. We actually have two questions. So I'll ask the first one. The first one says, as you mentioned, we need policymakers to redesign and more. Again, so that question ties up with what you were talking about, which is career opportunities. What comment would you make on career opportunities for public policy graduates in India?
I told you, choose a space and I'll find you the job. So that's important, because policy making is not a career. Policy making is a way of thinking. So don't get me wrong. Public policy is a platform where you're going to learn a way of thinking. It's going to be strategic. It's going to be operational. Possibly the single course which allows you to understand performance for today, because you have to solve problems of today. You can't tell your citizens that I'm going to solve it 5 years later. And you got to plan for the future. So one of the few rare skill sets in a formal training that you can get is performance plus transformance. So you'll have to learn how to perform today as much as you'll have to learn how to transform society for tomorrow. And that you'll have to be a servant, you'll have to visualize, you'll have to think of the future, you'll have to also be a performer for today. So I believe every single space is demanding such people. Every single career needs such people. So to be more operational, you can go into several spaces. The easiest is academia. You have to create more and more generations of young people. And this country, it's a good sign that they're having a lot of schools mushrooming. But I have a problem with schools mushrooming in management schools and in law schools. Because lawyers, I'm not nothing against Rajkumar and team. I'm not against lawyers. But believing that only lawmaking is policy making is a very narrow understanding of policy. We need formally trained public policy graduates to actually operate along with lawyers, along with economists, along with anthropologists, along with all the other disciplines that Sudarshan was talking about. And for that, you need to have a way of thinking. And that way of thinking is what MPP programs or BA economics and others in the policy school can give. So you may go into academia to build the cohort of good academicians to train the future policymakers. You may want to get into the research space. Evidence-based policy making is a necessity today. Earlier, we had eminence-based policy making in India. I'm well known, I'm eminent, I get invited to be on the planning commission, I get invited to be in all these committees and boards. I give my ideas, I don't even know what they are. They're so fossilized, and governments listen, they implement programs based on that. That is going away now. The governments are looking to evidence-based thinking, evidence-based policy makers. And so you could get into formal policy think tanks, into formal research space. You will build your research skills, quantitative research, qualitative research. Policy analysis is one space where you need mixed methods a lot. So we need all kinds of analytical tools that you need to have. So you can get into that. Third, like I said, corporate world is looking to engage with governments, because you cannot take away government from corporates. You can take corporates far away from government, but you can never take the government out of a corporate. And which means you need policy understanding and policy analysts and policy advocates within corporate ecosystem. So you can get jobs there. You may also get jobs in NGOs, civil society organizations. Today you are talking about advocacy in a very serious way. For that, you have to understand policy. You have to be part of the policy narratives and policy formulation process. So you'll have to get into that spaces. So there's a lot of opportunities. Honestly, if I were to say, we don't have enough people. So the capacity building commission, I want to recruit 10 people with high quality analytical and communication skills, preferably the MPP background. And I'm not finding people good enough for that, because you just don't have the institutions producing them. So one Jindal here, one Jindal there is not going to find an answer for India. We need Jindals in every state. And only then we can make a reasonably noticeable difference. So I'm telling you, jobs are not going to be the problem. So think less about jobs. I think if you're getting into policy space, you should think about how passionate you are about living your purpose to make a difference to society. That is the job you have. Everything else is wasted opportunity. So believe that you can make a difference. Join a policy school because you want to be the difference. Otherwise, don't waste your time. You will get jobs without a degree even. So go find those. But the moment you go into a policy program, be passionate enough to be driven by a higher level purpose to make a difference in the public space. And that is the kind of people we need. I think that should be the selection criteria for Jindal from now on. I'm sure you have something like that.
Thank you, Dr. Balu. Actually, this question was asked by Pranjali from the Masters in Public Policy program. And last year we had an excellent batch of students. I had the pleasure of teaching them. So I'm sure they're very glad to hear that, that there are lots of jobs and that they don't have to be very worried.
All of them found jobs, are they available still?
There are perhaps a few available. I mean, we will have to check out and
Your career services department has got a few CVs of your students. Please ask them to share it with me.
Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Bal. Thank you. I'll ensure that they do that. Our next question is from Manasa, and she says, "Thank you for the talk, sir. What are your thoughts on policies or programs that work to make communities self-sufficient as opposed to those that require outside or state intervention to sustain? And are those necessarily mutually exclusive?" And this is again our last batch student.
It's a great question. Coincidentally, just 2 hours ago, I was talking to senior policymakers and administrators how we have inherited a system. Unfortunately, it's a mindset. I spoke about the mindset of policy making, and that's why I specifically said post-COVID. Let's look at what we inherited in 1947. We inherited the British system of public administration. The British have gone far ahead. I know studied 7 or 8 countries the last 3 months, and they have gone far ahead in the public administration processes, the reforms. But we are still colonized. We are still in a prehistoric period in public administration. So we inherited a system which looked at policy making and policy delivery from the lens of subjects of belonging to a crown. We never looked at policy making as for citizens of a sovereign state. We never saw citizens as people who are going to be partners in progress. We never wanted citizens to be independent. We never wanted citizens to be empowered. We didn't want them to be engaged with the state. So we always saw them as recipients of goods and services. We never saw them, we never even asked the question, what goods and services we want, right? We never had the time for all that. Like I write about it in Voices from the Grassroots. We never listened to these voices. We thought that what will the poor know? After all, I know what the poor need. The poor don't know what they need. They can't even, they're so poor they can't articulate their poverty. So we had all these narratives that we built. And therefore the state became not just a big brother, but became somebody which facilitated the citizen to become a parasite. We actually created a mindset of entitlement. And today we talk about entitlement. So what did we do for 70, 75 years? So I think to move, there are 2 problems. One is moving the administrator from the colonial mindset to the mindset where he sees citizens as partners in progress. How does he change? And also moving the citizen from simply seeing himself as a recipient of goods and services from a welfare state to seeing that I have to participate in my own development and enterprisingly work hard for it. So we are in a populist political model. We are in a political economy which actually takes away these very necessities. And so we're patronizing what has been there for 75 years. Only now, right, whether it is surrendering your gas cylinders or paying the full price of petrol, even that we grumble, right? We are getting used to market dynamics in policy making. We're getting used to systems and processes which are actually making us participant. We're getting used to social accountability and social audits. Not in all our programs, at least NREGS other programs. We're getting used to the fact that I can nominate somebody for the Padma Shri. I can actually send suggestions to the Prime Minister's office for the Mann Ki Baat. Every month, for me, what is music to a person like me's ears is the Department of Grievances receives close to 6 lakhs and above public grievances every month. And we have algorithms which filter it, understand it. So we actually know what are the pressure points for our citizens today. And we have state capacity to process it, to understand it. We're able to look at MyGov data. I am looking at designing training programs for the civil services based on what people's problems are and what are they repeatedly telling through the various tools that we're getting. So I believe change started. Is it fast enough? No. Is it perfect? No. Do we have all the solutions? No. But I think it's going to be generational. So to me, India at 75 is not just a slogan. India at 75 is going to be the watershed when a lot of these processes become institutionalized and shift will happen. I think one generation of policy makers who are used to giving, providing. So we can't simply make it overnight. So I think the transition from providing to provisioning to partnering is a long drawn process. So we are still enjoying providing. They're just gradually moving towards provisioning. And provisioning to partnering will be fast. Because citizens have to become more engaged and empowered, as much as the state has to become less insecure about its role. When both these happen, it started, I think I am very optimistic, and I have seen the state from outsiders' perspective. Now I'm beginning to see from insiders' perspective. And with a very limited understanding of just 1 month into the system, I can tell you the preparedness is there, the intent is there. That is half the battle won. And then giving them the toolkit to actually deliver on their intent, that's what the commission is all about. So I believe we don't have the answers to what you are asking, Manasa, in terms of the perfect program, but the journey has begun, and it's very exciting. It's going to be promising. I think it will take at least 5 to 10 years for it to see some impact.
Thanks, Dr. Balu. I really like what you said, that the state also has to start becoming a little less insecure about. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of the role that administrators play, and also the decades-long experience which shows that perhaps the state is also not willing to let go of its control over various aspects. And I think that is really a very tough journey.
Jindal as a university exists today only because the state is learning to become insecure and letting go. Otherwise, you couldn't have created what you have created. In the older systems and institutional structures, you couldn't have existed and delivered all that you're delivering today. And the state will learn. State understands that it is experiment like Jindal, which is possibly the way for higher education, and it will make it better and better possibly. Yeah. The next university, they may make it more simpler and more easy. So the more barriers you have crossed, they become learning points for the state also to become better. So I think these are evidences the state is actually the intent. What I said is intent. These are also intent evidences.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So we have another question from Vivekananda Jha, who is a fellow at Jindal. He's the TRIP Trip Fellow. He is actually an alumni of Jindal. He says, "Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, sir. I keep following your work and your organization. Sir, you're part of HR capacity building for civil servants. Do you think that the COVID has given an opportunity for the policymakers to be more community-centric?"
Do they have a choice? Because if you don't get communities on your side, you can't fight the COVID battle. You can't prescribe solutions. You'll have to get the citizen to co-own the problem and agree to wear a mask, agree to do physical distancing. Unless you design newer economic opportunities which incorporate all these new prescriptions that you're making, you can't get it to be done, right? India is a very nice country. We've not had protest on the streets for all the policy prescriptions the state is giving. Look at other countries. We're having protests for wearing masks. We're having protests for not going to the beach. We're having protests if you shut down the mall. We are such a decent country that way. We haven't had all those. So I think maybe the state is responding by, it may not be evident in a large scale. There are 1.3 billion people, obviously. But I can tell you there's several experiences of administrators I have seen. It may have all been micro context. What I am looking at, and this is where institutions like Jindal can play a huge role. We at the commission are actually looking at putting together all these success stories. So unless you cross-pollinate, you explode it as a case study. Why should I learn a case of Boston housing program that I teach in my school here? I should be teaching how a small deputy commissioner in a rural Aurangabad managed oxygen despite all the crisis. And that could be lessons for future policymakers for other administrators, right? And this is where you have an obligation. I don't think it's a responsibility. You have an obligation to India. But institutions like Jindal create these cases for us. Because we would like to use it and make sure the teaching learning material comes from properly documented, well-written cases that can be used in institutions. So to me, they are discovering it. We need to make it, we need to celebrate it. And I think the way to celebrate it is to legitimize it through these kind of cases which people can learn from each other. And I would say, it's one more thing on your list. So Professor Rajkumar has to worry about creating a department for that now. We'll be very happy to share our knowledge, experiences with that.
Thank you. I think thank you very much, Balu. It was terrific. This is recorded. So we'll find out which of our students was not able to hear you and make sure that they do. And then to have a discussion on your points, because that's a good way to, because this is the first lecture for the incoming batch, and you've given us so much to think about that we'll kick off the program, the academic year, discussing the implications of what you've spoken to us in our classrooms. And all our faculty have listened to you, and so we couldn't have had a better start to this academic year, even though we wish that our students were on a very lovely campus. And we hope that if, with the kind of far-sighted management, we are able to overcome the pandemic, we will have students on campus, and we would invite you to come and join us. And it's a kind of it's a place that's like a retreat for thinkers. So when you are dealing with some naughty problems in the commission and you want to get away from, Delhi, you are welcome to come and spend time with us in quiet contemplation and reflection, and some conversations with young people. That's always stimulating. I now request our registrar, Professor Sridhar Patnaik, to bring our commencement event to a close, expressing his thanks on behalf of the university.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan. It's truly a wonderful experience listening to Dr. Balasubramaniam. And I must say that it's just a masterclass, not a mere commencement lecture. Although this is the lecture meant to begin our new academic session for all our existing students, and even to welcome our newly admitted students, although their classes will officially commence or start on 16th of August in an online mode. But nonetheless, the kind of lecture that he had delivered based on his lived experiences and bringing in different perspectives is not only just amenable, according to me, for the students of the master's or the undergraduate programs at the School of Government and Public Policy, but it is so very well suited for students of other programs, if at all they had joined the lecture, be it students belonging to law or business or even international affairs for that particular matter. And we express our deep sense of appreciation to Dr. Balu, as he's fondly called, for taking time out of his schedules to be with us and to educate all of us on this very important topic, public policy in a post-COVID world, and his experiences, his qualifications, everything I'm sure will be so very inspiring to our students because his brought in his diverse experiences and with an eclectic set of qualifications, which will truly be inspiring our students now and even in the years to come. I also take this opportunity to congratulate all the students who obtained admission to the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. And important piece of message, this is what you could expect by being a part of the school, the kind of lecture you heard just now from Dr. Balu, and you'll have many more from the faculty members teaching at the Public Policy School, and also you will benefit from the courses and intellectual inputs coming in from other schools of the university, as rightly alluded to by the Vice Chancellor. So you only have something to gain and benefit from here onwards. And to help you induct into the school, we also had organized a pre-semester immersion and training and engagement program, which we presume you all had attended. And very soon there is going to be university resource orientation as well, all of which is going to lead you to officially start your classes on 16th of August. And please be assured of every kind of an intellectual and even administrative support from the university as you begin your academic journey. And you'll have many more opportunities to engage with thinkers and practitioners like Dr. Balasubramaniam and many others. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Balu, once again. The program has ended.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balasubramaniam.